Hello, everybody. We don't have pictures of pretty babies. We're not going to talk about food, but we're going to talk about quantum and industrial design. And I'd like my panelists to please come up on the stage. And let me introduce myself while we're waiting for that. So some of you may have seen Roman Orus from Multiverse's presentation, where he talked about making quantum accessible to his grandmother. So I am his grandmother in so many ways, because I'm not a scientist, but I advise Multiverse. I organize the City Quantum Summit at the Mansion House in London, where we bring together the CEOs of financial firms and the CEOs of quantum computing firms to ensure that actually we get quicker applications of quantum. And I write a column for the Quantum Insider, which is the industry platform. I'm your moderator today, and I would just like each of the panelists to introduce themselves. John, will you start?
So my name's John Hammant. I lead the compute business for Amazon Web Services for UK and Ireland. That consists of all of our EC2, high-performance computing, all kinds of interesting stuff, and then the really fun, slightly esoteric stuff in terms of quantum computing, autonomous vehicles, and autonomous systems.
I'm Celia Merzbacher. I am Executive Director of the Quantum Economic Development Consortium, or QED-C, which is a US-based but global consortium of stakeholders that are all working to grow and enable the quantum industry. So we're sort of an association for this emerging industry today. We have about 170 companies and about 250 members altogether, including universities and research labs and others. Thank you.
I'm Richard Murray. I'm the Chief Exec of ORCA Computing. So we build photonic quantum computing systems, and more recently we apply those to machine learning and to error correction.
And I'm Julian Gray. I'm Vice President of Digital Science and Innovation at BP, which is our frontier technology organization, our R&D organization. And I'm here because we have a quantum center of expertise, and we work with ORCA and with members of the QED. And so, yeah, we look at frontier technology and look at how we might apply it to the energy transition to our business, and try and catalyze a little bit how the world can use it as well.
Thank you. The reason we brought together this panel was because they're actually experimenting right now and doing things right now. Now, two important events happened last week, and I think they're very relevant for quantum. One is an obvious one. IBM got to 400 qubits on its machine, and it said it was fine with its roadmap for 2025 to have 4,000. 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, we wouldn't have believed that was possible. So that's on the technical side. But on another side, the other big event was COP27. And COP27, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, he has a quote which I hope you've all heard: "We're on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator." And quantum is going to be the only way we're going to stop that. Okay, and a few other technologies. But quantum is going to be crucial to stopping that. Human behavior isn't going to change. So it's got to be machines. Now, Celia, you, because your association has members as big as Amazon and as tiny as the latest startup, you have a very good overview of where progress is happening, hardware, software. Do you want to share that?
Well, thanks, Karina. It's very exciting, and we started in 2018, and in just that short time, I've seen so much progress. And you're right, there are a lot of big companies making very big bets, and you read about them all the time. But and I've been in sort of the innovation policy world for quite some time. I believe that innovation really happens primarily in the startups and the small companies where things can move very quickly, and then the big companies can acquire them. So that's a sort of natural innovation process, and we're seeing it happen in quantum as well. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves that quantum science has been around for a long time. Nanoscale science really enabled us to control things at the scale of atoms, and that kind of combination of the science of the physics of quantum with the nanoscience matter control has brought us to this point where we're able to take advantage of these quantum behaviors and really put them to some practical application. And those applications include not just computing, but also sensing and communications and cybersecurity and many others. So to your point, quantum will be part of the technology that leads to all kinds of solutions for the world's problems.
Now, let's go to something very specific, which is, again, there were these myths about quantum computers. If I think about 4 or 3 years ago, they were going to cost billions and only the biggest companies could have them. But the models changed. And I think Richard and ORCA, ORCA computing is a very different model that we're seeing today. Do you want to talk about it a bit, Richard?
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. And to pick up on Celia's point, I mean, our view is also that a lot of the secrets of quantum computing will come through innovative new approaches. So ORCA is one of those small companies, really formed from a small number of people doing some amazing things. So we started the company based on some pretty deep research that happened at the University of Oxford. And it was that technology that allowed us to imagine quantum computing to be built from off-the-shelf telecoms components. So in our view, large-scale quantum computing looks a lot like a network. That's the way that you build in scale to this technology. And just because of some of the technology that we had, we were able to take that even further and actually build systems, photonic quantum computing systems, using off-the-shelf telecoms components. So literally imagine, the internet technology that we use every day, our team repurposed that, combined with some pretty tough things relating to single photons, in order to build quantum computing systems. And that unlocks a lot of new things. I think many people are familiar with cryogenically cooled quantum computers, which may be very expensive, maybe very exclusive as well. And ORCA looks at changing that perception. So through our systems, which, by the way, we've sold 3 of today, one we were in the news for selling to the UK Ministry of Defence, and then one to a Middle Eastern customer. So in our view, by making quantum cheaper, as well as performant, that unlocks a whole host of new applications. And on the very, sorry, I know I'm taking a lot of the airtime, on the very commercial side, remember that quantum is not just a technology, it's also a new business and a new business model. If you look at the use of high-performance computing, there's not a lot in the market for systems that cost way in excess of $1 million. The market is dominated, the majority of that pyramid, the market is dominated by technologies which cost less than $1 million. So in our view, if quantum is really going to be a true game-changing technology, you've got to address the price point, as unsexy as that sounds, the price point and the business model of delivering that, as much as you do need to address the technology. And ORCA does both through some of our activities.
So I want to move to John, because it's from the minnow to the whale. Killer whale, a bit of a killer whale, AWS. So how is AWS, what's its offering in the quantum ecosphere?
Yeah, and I completely agree with actually what the panel said so far in terms of a lot of the innovation coming from small, nimble startups. I think that's clear, and that's kind of one of the things that we really want to help. So if you look at our quantum ecosystem at the moment, one of the key things that we believe is this ability to democratize quantum computing. We want everyone, no matter who they are, where they are, to be able to take advantage of some of these things as they go forward. But you take one thing from all of this, it's that you can go home, you can use Amazon Bracket, you can spin up and you can test things on a quantum computer now. We actually, not just one quantum computer, we've got around 9, I think, currently running in production in Europe, across the world. And I think that's where we really play that part in the ecosystem. As smaller companies come in, the ability to effectively take those offerings and democratize them out. And I kind of agree with you. I think, so as we look at the way that high-performance computing and quantum changes, I think increasingly you're going to come to a point where you have large-scale shared resources. Do I think in 10 years' time from now, every company, or 20 years' time from now, every company will own a quantum computer? Probably not, is my honest take. Do I think they will take advantage of it and take advantage of some of the hybrid algorithms by effectively pulling those resources down from cloud provider? Yes, definitely. So that's kind of where we think we want to help build the marketplace, along with some of our competitors that are doing similar things. That's just a good thing to shape the whole overall thing forward from our perspective. And it enables that investments to come back to the smaller companies that can deliver some of those underlying pieces of technology.
Can I jump in and point out that when I look at all these companies that are members of my consortium, the big companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, IBM, and others are not quantum companies. your company is a quantum company. So there's a quantum startup inside of your company. And so I'm not dealing with Jeff Bezos. I'm dealing with the person who's in charge of the little quantum startup at AWS. And so there's a sort of different behavior, even at the big companies. It's very sort of startup feeling, I think. So I think that's an important characteristic to think about.
So there's another giant in the room, which is BP, and the truth of the matter is quantum is going to be incredibly helpful, and Julian can actually give us some examples of how it's being used, whether it's sensors, communication. Just talk us through all the different aspects of using quantum.
Yeah, sure. And I just agree with you. I don't think we're going to own a quantum computer. That's pretty unlikely, I'd say. And we've thought that from the start. So we've been working in quantum since about 2016, and we've covered everything. We obviously work a lot with quantum computing and looking at how we can use that in the future, but also quantum sensors, where we're developing hydrogen sensors with a startup in the UK and Fraunhofer, and that's something that we'll be able to use sort of massively as hydrogen grows. We're looking at quantum communications, and finally we're also looking at quantum clocks. So quantum clocks to be able to have really close-knit time down to a nanosecond in GPS-denied areas is also going to be useful for us to be able to use the other technologies. So we've done each one. So the quantum clock we've tried with the Royal Navy, and they've taken that out into the sea, and they've been able to use a quantum clock out on a carrier. For the sensors, as I say, we're developing this. We've already tested a hydrogen sensor. We expect to lower the cost of the hydrogen sensor so that we could massively roll it out as hydrogen itself as an energy vector starts to grow, and that will take some time in its own right. And then on quantum computing itself, we've tried a number of things so far. We've looked at optimizing certain markets, so the trading sphere. We've looked at chemical discovery and chemical route discovery so that we can look at different feedstocks and seeing how that might work with quantum. And then we've also looked at mass optimization problems, things like thermodynamics, or looking at how it might be able to use it with the world of seismic and other areas where we've already got large-scale computing. But quantum, we expect, will completely change that. And so I'd say what we've been doing is discovery and learning, and then working with the startup companies. We have our team in BP that is our quantum team is very small. It's 5 people. It works a little bit like a startup, and we work with companies like ORCA and others on trialing and piloting use cases so we can see where we can get to, but also so that we can give advice back to the companies on how we think the algorithms might change and how we think the development should go, so that we in the future will be able to use this and use it, and we kind of plan our sort of short, medium, and long term in that way to work, and then choose who we're going to work with and to get us there.
When you say short term, is it next year that you're going to actually have some better results from something using it specifically?
Well, when we say short term, it's more quantum inspired. So we work with quantum companies, and we develop the algorithms, but then we go back and say, well, how can that inspire what we're doing already? How can that change the processes that we've got in the organization already? How can we use different methods of compute using the inspiration of the quantum algorithm to then go back and be able to use it in a live environment? And that might be something like a neuromorphic computer or a different kind of computer, but absolutely, that's what near term is getting inspired to do something differently, I think.
Yeah, just if I might add, it's really interesting because, there's been a lot of talk about quantum inspired, and that's incredibly important and incredibly interesting, frankly. New ways of tackling current algorithms just using things that look a bit quantum but aren't themselves quantum. I guess I wanted to say a bit more about ORCA's approach. So there do exist a few devices in the world that have achieved quantum advantage, quantum supremacy. So quantum devices in the world that have done something completely trivial, completely not useful, but they've done something that no classical computer in the world can do. And that is tested. That's an arms race a little bit, but that is tested and has been verified. So ORCA's challenge is building hardware and also observing what hardware is out there. Using our machine learning team, how do we take those not useful quantum experiments, those not useful quantum devices, those ones which have been applied to trivial and immaterial problems, and turn them into useful problems? And the team and I also always say, this system is so complex that it has done something that a classical computer can't do. surely as humanity and us as a team can find applications and uses of those systems, and they are starting to emerge. So on that timescale sort of question, application of these not useful quantum supremacy devices, application is happening. People are discovering promising commercial use cases for those systems, and I do like to think that any day now a breakthrough will happen. Really within my own company and others, a breakthrough may happen any day that shows that. And then you've got your first practical use case that you can start broadening and applying to other things once you've done that.
So you have actually, as you mentioned, sold one to the Ministry of Defence in the UK. So what are they doing with it?
A few different things. So they're using it to train their own people. And I do think, it sounds trivial, but the training of people to work with these incredibly different futuristic new devices is pivotal to make sure that your workforce is there and ready for when useful, promising devices do exist. So the first activity is training and education and development. The second is trialing and benchmarking applications on that system, remembering, and I don't pretend that system is useful at this point, but trialing and benchmarking applications. And then the third, probably the most important part, is road mapping. So seeing where the system is today and benchmarking that, and working out a practical roadmap of the order a few years to useful applications. So looking at how ORCA's technology will evolve, looking at how the algorithms we're developing will evolve, and others, and then sort of trying to judge exactly the point where everything will become real. That's probably true for many different customers. It's not necessarily about where it is today, but unless you do the work today, you've got no sight of that moment, in my view, that will occur fairly soon, where quantum will all of a sudden start developing useful application, valuable applications.
Can I just build on that just a slight build, which is by working with the startups and working to try and uncover parts of the algorithms that need to be changed, improved, etc. When we get to the point when we've got a quantum computer that we can actually use, we'll have solved some of the problems that for that future already. So getting ourselves ready for the moment when we've got quantum advantage on something that we can really implement, I think is really, really important to do early on. And that's parcel of why we created a centre of expertise, so that we can feed back, so that we're ahead when we get to that point in the future.
I mean, that's a very interesting point, because quantum readiness is a thing that worries a lot of governments. I mean, I've been asked to try and bring some companies together to try and get people to realize, because obviously, people like BP realize there's so many companies out there who don't realize and are just saying, well, why don't I just wait till something happens? So, John, are the companies who don't take this on board, who are not working on it already, are they just going to be disrupted out of the water?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting when you start to look at quantum use cases, where it's going. I think there's a few things that I've found in my life that I think if people realise better, actually this would all be very interesting. I think from a start, when you look at some of the key use cases that I think are going to come in, that are going to be genuinely transformative, I think chemistry is one of these places it's going to come in. I think one of the things that I feel I was lied to in school is that we understood chemistry. You look at the periodic table, you think you understand how these things happen. And the reality is, actually, we understand very, very little of some of these interactions, surprisingly little. So, if I look at the legacy that war brings, for example, so if you look at one of the legacies from the First World War is still going on, as crazy as that sounds. So the Haber-Bosch equation, 1909, used to create ammonia for explosives in World War I. That still takes around 1% of overall global energy usage and about 1.4% of carbon dioxide emissions. And we know that isn't needed. And so I look at, so back to your point, sorry, on will people be left behind? I think at the moment we're almost in the days of kind of I would say probably about the 80s or so. So I'm old enough to remember bulletin board systems and remember the squeaky noise as my Amiga used to dial up, and I'd go on to interesting things. And at the time, there was no way that I could envision actually what a modern smartphone was. The fact that I've come in here, I've downloaded a ticket off my phone, I've scanned it with a QR code through another connected device. I couldn't even imagine that. And I think that's what's going to happen with quantum. People look at the use cases that quantum are going to have, and they look at them with the lens of what we currently do. And I think the reality is, actually, it's going to be as big as a jump as we've seen through the internet, through electrification, all of this. So yeah, completely to your point. We need to start, the way you get to this point is, the way I got to my understanding of the internet was playing around with the early days of it, starting to understand what a BBS was, starting to understand what IRC and these early protocols that come in. And I truly believe the same thing is going to happen with quantum. I think companies that aren't investing in it now will just get left behind as it moves at that pace.
Celia, because one of the things that feeds into this is, why has the ecosystem built up so quickly? And I'd say, interestingly, the geopolitical issues with China, with Russia, this has made most countries rather more paranoid than they were before, and understandably so. Now, you have less international collaboration, sovereignty has become a big issue again, but on the other hand, mountains of money, especially the US, mountains of money pouring into tech and especially into quantum. Do you think this has given a bit of an extra impulse to the industry?
Well, I think it has. I would argue that, in fact, there's a lot of collaboration going on among the business community. They don't look at borders the same way that government does. And so businesses naturally find their partners, find their markets, do business across, they find where the suppliers are. And when I look at, one of my members has said publicly that 80% of the parts that they buy to put into their quantum computer, they buy from outside the US. So, I think that's probably true for most technology devices. A lot of it is purchased from other places. And so there's already a global supply chain. That's a fact. Now, I do agree with you that quantum is an emerging technology that's emerging today into the world that we're in today, which has the geopolitical landscape that it does. And so it will be impacted by that landscape, and there will be sort of gives and takes made. But I think all of the geopolitical things that are happening, including the war and things like that, are driving partnerships at the government level and supporting what's going on already at the industry level. So I'm more, I guess, optimistic about it than pessimistic. But there is obviously a sort of mindfulness and concern that this is not a race that you want to lose. And so the governments have a sort of national interest in investing in the area. So you do see strong investment going to the science as well as the technology.
Richard, I want to move on to ESG because we started this conversation about it, and I think it is something that really makes it more understandable. What do you think? Where do you think quantum is going to be most useful for ESG?
The environmental side is huge, and I think that's easy to forget sometimes. Maybe not, but applying this system to all sorts of exotic things. It doesn't take long talking to people using high-performance computers, or indeed any form of computing, to find how much carbon we all use by simply processing the data. So friends of mine in data storage and in data centers often comment that whenever you send an email, it generates a gram of carbon dioxide. How many people realize that? When they're looking at their carbon, the carbon emissions related to their day-to-day lives, how many people realize that when they're excited about adopting AI, that actually that AI model is probably not as good as it could be because the cost of energy and obviously the consequence of the energy use used to train that model is so inhibitive. Literally, our computers are just incredible users of the most fantastic amounts of energy. And that has to change. We're all excited about adopting AI, but when you look at the cold light of day, the amount of energy consumed in doing that, I think that needs a new way through to be truly adopted in the way we're excited about. So I think the environmental thing, and I'm sure the other panel members, especially BP, will comment on the more specific applications of quantum computing and quantum devices to energy and sustainability.
Could you just give us specifics about why quantum computers use less energy?
Well, because as you're trying to train these gigantic AI models, if I take just AI as one example, many, when you learn about machine learning, it's no surprise about how much energy it consumes, because you've got this huge network which you're iterating on multiple times. That's just fantastic amounts of compute power. And so to your question, quantum allows you to take some parts of that model and to offload them onto a quantum system. So I'll tell you, we had a direct conversation with an energy center, talking about, oh, well, how many megawatts of power does your quantum computer consume? We said, oh, well, 2 kilowatts, and they spat out their teeth. They couldn't believe that we were talking about a next-gen computer system that with that low energy consumption. So being able to offload your problem onto the quantum machine, not only are you potentially improving the runtime, but you're moving onto a platform that can literally run on a plug socket out of the wall rather than a fantastic amount of energy. But I'm the wrong person to talk to about this. I'm sitting next to two of the largest owners of HPC.
I mean, I'll take just one really quickly on that. So I suppose where we see it, it's really interesting. When you look at increasingly large machine learning jobs, so that's autonomous vehicles, drug discovery, anything around it, they increasingly are taking exponentially more time. Like, it's really interesting if you look at GPT-3, GPT-2, or GPT-4 that's now in training at the moment, and you look at the amount of energy that's been, there's this exponential curve of the amount of energy that's needed. Quantum effectively inverses that. So the more qubits they add, the more exponentially powerful the machine becomes. And I do completely agree. I think for large-scale machine learning tasks that we all want, whether that's personalized drug discovery, all these kind of interesting things coming, there is no other option. We unfortunately otherwise will hit this exponential curve coming in around machine learning that will just stop the industry. So it is needed for that in the long term. I think the hybrid approach will be what will come in the short term, but in the long term it will be, I think, what we're using for pretty much all large-scale machine learning.
And I think, let me just put a sort of exclamation point on this concept. If you add one more transistor, one more bit to a classical system, you increase its performance, but just a little bit. If you add 1 qubit to a quantum computer, you double its performance. So you very quickly, with not that many qubits, that are practical and useful, and the error correction aside and so on, the power keeps doubling with each one you add. So that really is, I think, what's distinctive. So, is it how quickly we get to that crossover is unknown, but it's inevitable.
And just one, I mean, I can completely agree. I think one of the other interesting things that I've definitely seen over the last year or so is initially this focus on making increasingly complex individual quantum computers. All of a sudden, over the last short period of time, we're seeing more and more this ability to network together different QPUs photonically and keep them entangled. And I think actually that's going to be one of the things that makes that real breakaway, that kind of step change. You bring multiple ones together and you get that exponential benefit if they come around.
And as kind of a user of all of this, we've kind of followed that exact route. Where we believe we'll go next is quantum machine learning, because exactly that. We use massive machine learning models. We need them to get more complicated, they'll be more data hungry. So if we can solve for that by using quantum computers and then extend them so we can do more intractable problems like thermodynamics or market modeling or other things, then these are the areas that we really need to get into. And conversation we had about people want to come and work for BP.
Can I just say, 2 people who were offered jobs at Goldman Sachs chose to go and work for Julian at BP. Okay, and he wasn't offering anywhere near the same amount of money. Now, why do you think they did that? Because, by the way, we've talked about the scarcity of talent, so this is a really important point.
So I'll talk about a lady who came to exactly. There's one lady who came to us that she was going to go and work for Goldman's, and she came to us to work on, world-solving problems. Looking at climate change, looking at sustainability, looking at the fact that we're a company who's going to get to, we want to get to net zero carbon. That the whole company is behind that. So you come and work for BP, and you can work on those sorts of problems with a quantum computer and solve sort of huge optimization problems for power markets, or how we're going to get different feedstocks for bioenergy, or how we're going to think about water scarcity in parts of the world where we use a lot of water in BP. Water scarcity is a big thing for us. So all of these are problems that are global problems, but we need to solve them for our company, and then those can also be things that we can potentially be used for the rest of the world. So they come to us for that specific reason. Yeah.
But in fact, how will that work, Julian? Because you have a competitive advantage as soon as you get to the solutions to some of these things, but you are talking about the health of the planet. So how are you going to share this knowledge and make money of it, because you are a profit-making company?
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting question. We have we have these aims in BP, and we say our first 5 aims are to get to net zero carbon. Our second 5 are to help the planet to get there. So things like this, we could potentially have them as services. Partnerships are really important. So we have partnerships with companies who can productize these sorts of things. So we'll help develop them, but then they can be productized by, say, I don't know, a Microsoft or a small company. We partner with a lot of startups. We invest in startups. So there's all sorts of routes to market for them. And from our perspective, that can only be good for the planet, and it can be good for our company to lower the cost, to extend the algorithms, and so we're okay to work in that space.
Celia, personalized medicine. Everybody goes on about it, and it's great, and it's coming. And what does quantum bring to it?
Well, I think one of the things is the ability to really design, very specifically what's needed. So once you understand the target that you're trying to attach to with a drug, for instance, then quantum will allow you to do that design step very personalized. And I think that applies to everything from the talk we had before this one, right? They were designing food really at the atomic level. And so I can just sort of think of all kinds of applications where that ability to design things from the atomic level up is going to be much more targeted, specific, personalized, and efficient, ultimately. I used to be a material scientist, and we did what we called cook and look. So you kind of made the material, and then you went and analyzed it and see what you get. And that's a very iterative and tedious process and very inefficient. So I think we'll be able to skip all of those steps and go right to what we want from a design point of view.
Yeah. John, what do you think is one of the most exciting applications of quantum?
So I personally, I think in the near term, I kind of agree. I think it's material science. I think that really, it's material science and chemistry. I think the other interesting thing, we sit at this really interesting point where we've got a number of different exponential technologies coming together that I think are going to do really, really interesting things. So I think actually one of the things that will combine with this randomly is the reduction in cost in space launches. I really think that's going to be far more impactful than people think, whether that's either through SpaceX getting to $1,000 a kilo, or there's some really interesting centrifugal launch technologies like spin launch, who are literally just whipping things into the upper atmosphere. If I look at how some of these materials I think will be produced en masse, I think actually some of the best ways to do it is in a vacuum. And I think one of the really interesting things that I find is if we are going to solve problems on battery technology, carbon capture, all of these interesting things, I can definitely envision a nearish term future where you have quantum computing working to come up with new material technologies, and you have the construction of these things in lower Earth orbit, which sounds fanciful, but when you look at the way the technologies are coming through, it's extraordinarily possible in the near term. And that, for me, genuinely exciting. I think that's what will really change the world, change the way that we live. And I think that's all definitely within my children's lifetime, and I think definitely probably within my kind of working lifetime. And that's pretty cool, actually. I mean, seeing the same change to the world that happened with the iPhone, but with all the materials that we use, I think that's just going to be amazing, personally. Mind-boggling.
And Richard, what excites you most about quantum?
It's hard not to get excited by all those things about being able to... Yeah. I guess I'd give ORCA's perspective. So as much as we're excited about those things, it turns out, strangely, that our photonic systems that we're building are particularly good at solving particular types of machine learning problems. So you've heard me talk a lot about machine learning so far. My answer is machine learning. In particular, in the area of generative models, so machine learning models that generate data. Again, it seems like, and this is part of my view about how quantum will start to evolve over the next few years, you'll find specific hardware vendors find particular applications that their system is really good at. And for us, it's in this space, generative models. By the way, when I first heard about, this team came to me with a generative model, I said, great, it's great at generating images with AI. What else can it, why is that useful? What commercial use cases can that produce? And there are significant numbers of commercial applications of generative models that we are exploring. So that's the thing, selfishly, ORCA is most interested in.
So the fact is, we're not going to have one quantum computer, we're going to have lots of different models. And that is where we're at?
I think maybe in the end we might end up with a single view a quantum computer. Once you reach error correction, those types of systems, they're universal, they're good at many different things. My personal view, we're not there yet. There's a long way to wait until universal fault-tolerant quantum computing exists. So in that intermediate time, yes, different quantum hardware will find specific applications for different use cases.
Now, we're running out of time, but I don't really care. Julian, tell us quickly, on the ESG front, which is the application of quantum that you think is going to deliver the most benefits the fastest?
Well, I'll start by saying I think generative adversarial networks is definitely the way forward, and we could apply those to all sorts of problems, be they efficiency in hydrocarbons or emissions monitoring, or even optimization problems to create really much more efficient power networks and the way we can roll out renewable energy. So I go renewable energy and efficiency in power networks.
Okay. So
can I make a 10-second ad at the end here? Well, we're out of time, but if you're at the beginning of your career, or if you know someone who's going into their education and starting their thinking about the future, this is a great field to get into, and there will be more jobs at companies like BP, because every company is going to need someone who understands the power of quantum. There's going to be lots of jobs at companies like these as well, and so there's just a slew of opportunities for young people who are interested. So that's my message to take away.
Well, I hope you've seen from this panel, it ain't hype, it's happening. So come and join us. Come and join any of these companies or any of us, because there's a huge amount going on, and it's the most exciting possible field to be in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.